This second part looks at the geometry and architecture of normal faults. You've had some of this stuff before. I mean, a lot of the stuff when we talked about fault segmentation, we used the examples of normal faults, hard linkage and soft linkage, all those examples of that. So I'm not going to repeat that. These are all earthquake ruptures. Top right is the Gulf of Corinth, the one we were just talking about. Bottom left is Bora Peak, which I also talked about in Idaho. And you'll see these are all earthquakes, mainly from the Basin and Range, Pleasant Valley 1915, Dixie Valley 1956, Fairview Peak 54, Edmund Lake 59, and then Gediz is a big earthquake that happened in western Turkey. These are some of our biggest normal faulted earthquakes, but actually the rupture lines are not really that large. They're a few tens of kilometres, 20, 30, sometimes some of them are multiple ones, and maybe here's a scale, 20 kilometres. So some of them might get up to 60 kilometres, but they're very segmented. They have several breaks in it. And that means that the biggest normal faulted earthquakes don't really compare to the biggest thrust and strike slip earthquakes. We don't seem to be able to generate normal faults that are really, really big. And the reason for that, primarily, is because normal faulting occurs on stretched crust. And when you stretch the crust, you thin it, and therefore you've got a relatively thin seismogenic zone within which to operate, typically going down to maximum 20 kilometres, more likely 15 or so. So when you're trying to rupture that, you've got a limited fact of depth, and that actually we think also limits the physical length of the faults as well. So their down dip extent also limits their long strike extent. It still means you can get magnitude 7s, but it's pretty hard to get a magnitude 8 normal faults, and I would hazard the point that you could also absolutely possibly get a magnitude 9. These are all examples of normal faults. This is taken from a paper by Ian Davidson. It's going to be in the references. On the top left there is the normal faults at a mid-ocean bridge, so you can see the kind of scale in terms of that box. Then you can see down in the sea, this is a set of normal faults from the North Sea. Then we can scale to a set of normal faults in the Basin and Range. So all of these faults have got broadly similar characteristics, even though the scale of the areal extent of them is very different. And that's useful, because that means you can study small scale ones and get an idea about how the bigger scale ones work. So let's deal with some basics. Basic idea we've already talked about of a hanging wall that drops down and a footwall that comes up. The traditional terminology for this is the area that goes up is used by the German term Horst, and the bit that drops down is the hanging wall is the German term Graben, kind of rift. And then you get this classic view in B of this dropped keystone, the idea that it kind of collapses down. I'm going to show you later on that's really not how it works. But you can have situations where there's faults on either side. Much more likely, as we'll see, is a situation where you've got one major range-bounding fault, defines one side, and then on the other side, you've got a combination structure. So it folds over, and there's smaller faults that accommodate that. And these are referred to as, if there's smaller faults that are the same style as the main one, it's called synthetic. If it's small faults that are against, like opposed dip, called antithetical. But notice they're all excuse me. Notice that they're all normal faults. All of those faults are still normal. Very quickly past that, I'm not going to even attempt to do this diagram, but basically there's a nice paper I put into the portal, Glossary of Normal Faults. It goes through all of the terminology, has got this synoptic diagram that tries to put together all of the aspects. And you'll see that some of the aspects about duplexes are things that we've met before in the context of thrust faults, for example, or even strike slip. As we learned from Gulf of Corinth, the footwall rises up and the hanging wall drops down. We know something about the proportions. So what it means is that as you move your faults, you get a back tilting of the footwall for a start, and you get, as I say, increased subsidence close to the fault and decaying subsidence as you go away. This diagram is taken from one of James Jackson's early papers, and it's a paper that really looks at the Aegean, but then throws in a diagram from the Beatrice field in the North Sea. And these are contours of structured contours for the level of a hydrocarbon play in the Beatrice field, the top of the play. Here's a fault, and then you'll see this is something like 6,000, and then it kind of dips away in this one here, and that's what you're getting there is you're getting a tilted fault block. So that's the hydrocarbon plate sitting on the crest of a tilted fault block, which is dropping in elevation as you go back. And these diagrams really to the right just show a kind of simplified model of what would happen if you just moved those, used those faults to stretch more and more. You'll see this B, which is the beta value. And the beta value is just the length of a stretched region today versus what it originally was. It's a ratio of what it was. So they're all above 1. And so what we see is, as you produce more stretching, you tilt the fault progressively, and you create more accommodation space in the hanging wall for rift-based and stratigraphy to develop. But one of the things that you get from that, one of the geometric requirements, is the angle of the fault progressively declines over time as a result of stretching from 1.2 to 1.5. So that's now more or less doubled its length as a result of crustal stretching. Now, the way that we think of this is that we think of it as a series of dominoes, as a series of rigid blocks that if you just push them over, or a book, we often refer to it as a bookshelf model. In other words, take a stack of books, if you move them, you essentially, you can stretch out your bookshelf, or the books on it, but your angle of your books end up become more and more declining. So, in the bookshelf model, very nice and simple, but it assumes no strain within the block. So all the deformation occurs on the actual fault, nothing within the blocks themselves. The fault and the layers in there, so you imagine sedimentary layers in there, they rotate at the same time. There's the same amount of offset in all faults. The faults more or less share the same depth. Broadly, everything is planar in its simple case. And there's, again, this synchronicity in terms of the rate at which, and the timing at which the blocks go. So that is the notion that if you stretch a whole area like Greece, for example, today, what you're getting is you're getting that. And then that was Greece. Your upper bits are the mountains of Greece, and the lower parts are underwater as a result of marine gulfs. Now, if you continue to do that, this is what the bookshelf one or domino model does here. If you do that, you will eventually get faults down to about, well, it'll go down progressively until it gets to about 30 degrees. So according to James Jackson's view, or the view at that time, was when it gets to 30 degrees, those faults shouldn't move. They're hard to move, they're hard to drive. And the earthquake stories tell us that very few faults have dips of 30 degrees. So the implication is that the faults switch off when they get to that relatively low angle. If they do switch off, then, but the deformation is continuing, so the plate tectonic motions are continuing, then to drive extension, a new set of faults have to be developed. What you then need to do, if you're getting to this situation here, you start with this, you end with this, you then have to drive a set of new faults through there at 60 degrees to create a second generation that then also then start to change in depth as they go. And conceivably, could get down to 30 degrees, become inactive, and a third generation of sets comes up. So what you can end up getting is a very structurally broken up architecture as a result of these different generations of faults. And that's kind of shown a little bit in this, this is from Fosson's diagram from the North Sea. So you'll see on the right a nice big master fault with the upper Jurassic strata off the right, and then this is an uplifted footwall that we're mainly seeing back tilted. But you can see some of those faults are really low angle. So in this scheme, they would have been high angle and would have been rotated back to that lower angle, made inactive, and then cut through by the second generation of higher angle structures. One of the big debates when I was doing my PhD, what was it, late 80s or something like that, one of the big debates was, are faults planar, as indicated from James Jackson, or are they curved? Because a lot of the seismic reflection data that was coming out of the North Sea was showing these beautifully curved faults, as demonstrated here, so-called listric faults. In other words, they were high angle at the surface, but you can see the seismic that they declined in angle and eventually ended up being quite low angle at depth. Now, it's pretty clear that these faults exist. So here's an example of some seismic showing exactly that. You've got the seismic at the top, the raw seismic, and then you've got the interpretation. And you can see high angle, very high angle up here, quickly declines into low angle structure down here. So this idea of listric faults was really common in the late 80s, early 90s. And seemed to be, really contrast, kind of clash with what was coming out of the earthquake studies. Now there is a difference because most of the seismic interpretation was done in the uppermost few kilometres, and it was mainly the sedimentary pile. That's what people were interested in because that's where the oil was. So the idea, one of the ideas was, well, the near surface sedimentary pile might be kind of almost like slumping, but the big master faults that go much deeper, like down 10, 50 kilometres, could well be planar. But what this produces is an architecture. And so what I want to do now is to show you that it doesn't really matter if it's broadly high angle or planar or curved. What we're going to get is we can create really complicated fault geometry. I'm just going to run through this. This is a sequence of us moving this is from an analog model. Again, this is from Fossen. What we're going to, I want you to look at is the complicated geometry that we're going to end up with. And that could well be a rift basin in the North Sea that you guys are going to be looking at to try and work out how the faults evolve or where the hydrocarbon play is. So I'm just going to flick through it. And I want you to see how the different faults occur in different places. So this is with a beta stretching value of 1.15. So we're really just starting to stretch it. And then what we've done here, this fault's gone, but we've created a new fault here in the hanging wall. That's referred to as hanging wall collapse. Basically, it's easier for the fault to develop up into the hanging wall than it is the footwall. It's kind of akin to what I talked about in thrust, with that piggyback style. But you can also see other faults getting generated, and we can generate some also in the footwall. So that was our main kind of fault. You can see another fault's now being generated, but it's cut back into the footwall. And look at this complicated geometry that we're starting to get down here. It's kind of hard to work out if that's planar or curved or what. So what we end up with is when one fault goes, if you're dealing with loose or relatively increased sedimentary strata, you can create a really complicated architecture for your fault. So with lots and lots of faults all across that system. And that is a classic structure of a rift basin.